Associate Deputy Minister, Diversity and Inclusion and Youth with the Department of Canadian Heritage. Before I turn to you, Minister, I know you have an opening statement. We do have a little bit of committee business that we must complete first. I believe all members have a copy of the subcommittee report. The subcommittee met on Thursday, July 9th. To consider the business of the committee and agreed to a number of recommendations. We would that in relation to the study of the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the awarding of the sole source contract to We Charity, the committee hold meetings on Thursday, July 16th, Tuesday, July 22nd, Tuesday, July 21st, Wednesday, July 22nd, and Tuesday, July 28th. B, that the meeting on Thursday, July 16th, the first panel be comprised of the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth and the Deputy Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth, and that the second panel be comprised of the Clerk of the Privy Council and the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Skills and Employment Branch at Employment and Social Development Canada. C, that preliminary priority witnesses be submitted to the clerk no later than 12 p.m. on Monday, July 13th, and D, that final priority witness lists be submitted to the clerk no later than 12 p.m. on Friday, July 17th, and that over the course of the remaining three meetings, the committee hear from a maximum of 18 witnesses. So that was the motion that was moved. Just one word of explanation. The clerk was on holiday and not available for today's meeting, and I said that would be fine. We would have him on the 21st, and so that has been established. So does somebody want to move that report? Any discussion on it? Who wants to move it? Do I see anybody's hand? Okay, Peter Fragiskatis. Any further discussion on it? Okay, all those in favor, is anybody opposed? Might be the easiest way. I don't want to go through a recorded vote and take time. All right, all those in favor, carried. Okay, then with that, Madam Minister, we will turn to you, and we would, if you hold your remarks as tight as possible, certainly no more than 10 minutes, and then we'll have more time for questions. Minister Chagger, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you to the members of this committee for your ongoing work during these extremely challenging and unprecedented times. Je tiens également à vous remercier de m'avoir invité aujourd'hui à parler aux Canadiens des mesures que notre gouvernement a prises pour appuyer les jeunes Canadiens pendant la pandémie de COVID-19. Accompanying me today is Senior Associate Deputy Minister Gina Wilson. Moving forward, I will acknowledge her as my deputy. La pandémie de COVID-19 a profondément affecté la vie quotidienne de tous les Canadiens et touché de façon disproportionnée les plus vulnérables.
Minister, I don't want to interrupt, but just check to make sure when you're speaking French, you're on the French interpretation, because both languages are coming through at the same level. We had to, when you're on English, you got to speak, you got to use the English translation at the bottom of Zoom, and when you're on French, you got to use French. Otherwise, they come through equal. So.
La pandémie de COVID-19 a profondément affecté la vie quotidienne de tous les Canadiens et touché de façon disproportionnée les plus vulnérables. Les jeunes du Canada ne font pas exception. Monsieur le Président, les Canadiens souffrent. Mr. Chair, Canadians are hurting. As a member of Parliament for Waterloo, I have 3 post-secondary institutions in my riding that I was elected to represent. I know firsthand that students are facing a unique set of challenges during this pandemic, be it their studies, disruptions to work opportunities, internships and co-op placements, and like most Canadians, uncertainty about what comes next. When the pandemic hit, our government acted by immediately placing a moratorium on Canada student loan repayments, including interest relief. Then in April, the Prime Minister announced a $9 billion investment in students and youth, including the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. We also doubled Canada student grants and increased Canada Student Loans Program so that students facing financial challenges could access and afford post-secondary education. We increased employment opportunities and supports for youth across the country through the Youth Employment and Skills Strategy. We increased our investment in the Student Work Placement Program to help create 20,000 job placements for post-secondary students in their field of study. As part of the suite of supports for students and youth, the Government of Canada created the Canada Student Service Grant. At the time of the grant was developed, the pandemic had reshaped our reality, creating a number of overarching challenges. First, the country was in lockdown. Post-secondary students and recent graduates, like all Canadians, were facing unprecedented challenges. There was economic uncertainty, and it became apparent that there would be difficulties for students to find employment over the summer months. Employment that would be crucial in helping pay for school in the fall, paying down student debt, or related expenses such as housing and utilities. Second, we heard from many not-for-profits that they were struggling to provide services in their communities. Almost half of not-for-profits were having trouble finding volunteers, at the same time seeing an increased demand for their services. With public health guidelines requiring physical distancing, many not-for-profits needed to find new ways to engage volunteers while continuing to support their local communities within the context of COVID-19. Troisièmement, les étudiants nous ont également dit très clairement qu'ils veulent travailler, mais ils veulent également servir leur communauté. Monsieur le Président, nous avons vu des jeunes Canadiens retrousser leurs manches pour venir en aide à leurs voisins vulnérables, faire des courses à l'épicerie et permettre aux gens autour d'eux à se rapprocher en utilisant la technologie. Ils ont été là dans les moments qu'on a eu besoin d'eux. As a result of this reality, our policy objectives in creating this grant during the crisis were all-encompassing. We endeavored to provide a way for students to both serve their communities and develop skills while also rewarding their contribution and supporting their post-secondary education. It was important to me that the design of the program reflect the diversity of our country and be inclusive to students regardless of their ability, region, or socioeconomic status. I pushed to ensure that a diversity of students in a wide range of not-for-profits could participate in this new initiative. Given the scope and scale of the program, it was recommended by the Public Service that entering into a contribution with a third party was the best approach to ensure that both students and not-for-profits could receive the necessary support to deliver this program successfully and as quickly as possible. The contribution agreement that was negotiated by the Public Service and signed between the Government of Canada and We Charity allocated funding for different cohorts. The first announcement we made was for 20,000 placements, and $19.5 million was allocated. Of this $19.5 million, $5 million was for not-for-profits for the creation and support they needed, and $300,000 was for accessibility supports so that every student, regardless of ability, could participate. There were two other categories of funding envisioned in the contribution agreement. $10.5 million to be provided to We Charity to administer the program for smaller, local not-for-profits that would want to participate. This money was provided to We in anticipation of a desire of these groups to participate in the program. Additionally, as we've always stated, our intent was for this program to scale up. Had that occurred, there could have been another $13.53 million provided to We for an additional 20,000 placements. This would only have been authorized to go ahead if the demand was there and if the program was proceeding as planned. There were checks and balances put in place, and I would have to approve it for it to move forward. We had not moved to the second cohort. The maximum amount We Charity could have received was $43.53 million out of the total budget of $912 million. The vast majority of the monies were for grants that would have been issued by one-time payments for students to pay for their post-secondary education costs. Mr. Chair, I would like it noted for the record that our Public Service entered into a contribution agreement with We Charity, not a contract like the opposition continues to imply. Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais aussi clarifier une fois pour toutes, notre fonction publique a conclu une entente de contribution avec l'Organisation unie et non un contrat comme l'opposition continue d'affirmer. A contribution agreement allowed the department to leverage the network and digital capacity of a national organization to swiftly implement the CSSG program. The nonpartisan and professional public service made a clear recommendation that We Charity was the organization that was able to deliver this program in the timeline that was needed. Mr. Chair, as you know, We Charity is no longer delivering the CSSG. There are tens of thousands of students and hundreds of not-for-profit.
Monsieur le Président, un point d'ordre. J'ai cru comprendre que la traductrice qui fait la traduction en français nous dit qu'elle n'a pas reçu le texte avant, ce qui complique un peu son travail, je la comprends. Est-ce que j'ai mal compris ou si c'est le cas? Si oui, je pense que les règles du comité veulent que le texte soit transmis au traducteur avant, à l'interprète, pardon, avant, de façon à ce qu'elle puisse faire son travail plus efficacement. Est-ce qu'on peut éclaircir ce point-là, Monsieur le Président, s'il vous plaît?
Yes, it isn't a rule that ministers have to. It's better if they can. It's easier to make it happen in Ottawa. I'd ask the minister maybe to slow down a little bit to give translators a better opportunity to translate. Go ahead, Minister.
A contribution agreement allowed the department to leverage the network and digital capacity of a national organization to swiftly implement the CSSG program. The nonpartisan and professional public service made a clear recommendation that We Charity was the organization that was able to deliver this program in the timeline that was needed. Mr. Chair, as you know, We Charity is no longer delivering the CSSG. There are tens of thousands of students and hundreds of not-for-profits who express...
Monsieur le Président, c'est rapide. Est-ce qu'on peut avoir le texte écrit?
You're still going fairly fast,
C'est un point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président. Je pense qu'on devrait avoir le témoignage par écrit ou sinon qu'on ralentisse suffisamment et qu'on soit en communication avec l'interprète de façon à ce qu'elle puisse travailler correctement. J'aime beaucoup Mme Chagger, elle a une très belle voix, mais là, je l'écoute en français et j'aimerais pouvoir comprendre ce qu'elle dit, ça m'apparaît important. Là. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Est-ce qu'on peut l'avoir, le texte, en français?
It's too late at this point in time to get it to the translators, and it isn't an absolute policy of committees that they come with the prepared text to committee members and translators. That's the problem.
Chair,
we will have to deal with it as we can at the moment. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I can offer my words at the end if you would like so that they can be shared, and I will stick to English so that there's no translation issues.
Well, it isn't. The problem, I think, Minister, is that when you're speaking English, you're going a little fast, and the translators are having a difficult job getting it into French for the other language. I'm hearing it in English okay when you're speaking French. So just slow down while you're in English, please. Thank you.
Parce que si on veut prétendre qu'on est dans un parlement bilingue, il faut que les bottines suivent les babines, comme on dit souvent au Québec. Là. Alors, il faudrait peut-être qu'on fasse en sorte qu'on puisse entendre et comprendre aussi bien en français qu'en anglais. Mais là, c'est malheureusement pas le cas. Et je dois comprendre que c'est moins important que je comprenne ce que la ministre nous dit. Est-ce qu'elle pense qu'elle ne s'adresse qu'aux anglophones canadiens et que les francophones, ça ne l'intéresse pas? Si c'est le cas, il faudrait juste le dire.
Mr. Fortin, order, Mr. Fortin. Okay. I don't believe that's proper.
I don't believe neither.
She is speaking in both official languages. The reason we are using the Zoom through the parliamentary channel is so that bilingualism is upheld. If Ms. Chagger is speaking a little fast for the translators, we understand that. But I do not want it to be implied that either the minister or this committee is not abiding by the rules of bilingualism we are. So, Madam Minister, you have the floor.
Je ne le suppose pas, mais je posais la question, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to continue, there are tens of thousands of students and hundreds of not-for-profits who expressed interest in participating in this innovative program. It is unfortunate and regrettable that these placements are currently on hold. We acknowledge that this process was not perfect, and we remain committed to providing the additional support to both students and not-for-profits. We are working around the clock to find a new way to serve these needs. Our government's objective remains the same, to connect the skills and abilities that young people are looking to develop and strengthen with service opportunities to help heal communities. Our goal remains to get money to those in need as quickly as possible. Mr. Chair, I represent the voices of Canada's youth at the Cabinet table. I am committed to providing students and youth with the supports and opportunities that they need, because when Canada's youth succeed, our entire country thrives, and that has always been my priority. The measures I have mentioned are only some of the programs that we have put in place. These are necessary supports that students and youth need during this crisis. Mr. Chair, committee members, Canadians, thank you for your attention. We're happy to answer any questions, and we hope that we're awarded or provided the opportunity to provide the answers that members are looking for.
Thank you, Madam Minister. The first round of questions will be 6 minutes. We'll start with Mr. Poilievre, Mr. Fragiskatis, Mr. Fortin, and Mr. Angus. And I would say in beginning that we will follow as closely as we can the rules established in the House. We expect the answers to be relatively the same length as the questions. I will go back to the questions when that time limit has been reached, as is being done in the House on the COVID-19 panel. So with that, I usually try to give a little flexibility on a little more leniency on substantive issues, and we'll try to do that, but we want to stick as close to the time as we can. Mr. Poilievre, the floor is yours.
What is the name of the public servant who recommended that we deliver the Canada Student Service Grant? Just the name, please.
Madam Minister.
Rachel Wernick.
She gave the recommendation. Did she give it in writing?
Yes.
Do you know if she spoke to the Prime Minister's office, any member of the Prime Minister's office, prior to rendering that recommendation?
The public service made a recommendation to me that We Charity was the only organization that could deliver this program, and I accepted the recommendation.
Did Ms. Wernick speak to any member of the Prime Minister's office before making that recommendation?
I understand that Ms. Wernick will be appearing after me, and that's a great question you can pose to her.
Did Cabinet sign off on the sole sourcing of this contribution agreement to We?
There are processes that are followed. The public service made a recommendation to myself. I accepted the recommendation, and yes, I presented it to Cabinet. And
Back to Mr. Poilievre.
And your name was on the memorandum to Cabinet?
Yes.
Prior to that, did you discuss this matter with any member of the Prime Minister's office?
We have conversations and consultations all the time. We had a goal to help students during the pandemic, as well as
did you discuss it with? Did you discuss with the Prime
Mr. Chair,
Minister's office?
I believe that if I'm not interrupting, I should have the courtesy of being able to answer in the same time that was provided.
Go ahead, okay. Mr. Poilievre, and then back to the Minister.
Did you discuss this matter with any member of the Prime Minister's office prior to bringing it to Cabinet?
Madam Minister.
So I was given a recommendation by the public service. I accepted the recommendation. I asked many questions. Many questions have been posed, and I accepted the recommendation, and I brought it forward to Cabinet.
Did you discuss it with Katie Telford before bringing it to Cabinet?
I personally did not discuss it with Katie Telford.
Anyone else in the Prime Minister's office?
I personally did not have those conversations. I was working with the public service. The professional, nonpartisan public service made a recommendation. I accepted it.
So you did not discuss this with anyone in the Prime Minister's office prior to introducing it to Cabinet?
I did not have conversations with the Prime Minister's office in regards to the proposal that was being recommended by the public service.
Did you discuss it with anyone in the Finance Minister's office?
I personally did not have those conversations with the Finance Minister's office.
Did anyone in your office talk to
Mr. Poilievre? The Minister, give the Minister a little opportunity. Go ahead, Madam Minister. Madam Minister?
I answered the question, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Did anyone in your office speak to anyone in the Prime Minister's office about this proposal before it was introduced in Cabinet?
I know that it's a substantial amount that was budgeted, so I would hope that all offices would have been having conversations to ensure that the program was delivered in a meaningful and successful way.
So that's a yes, your office did discuss this with the Prime Minister's office prior to introducing it in Cabinet.
Mr. Chair, the member can choose to put words in my mouth. What I am stating is that we had a proposal and we want to move forward on a plan for students and not-for-profits to be able to deliver during this very challenging time. A recommendation was made by the public service. I acknowledge that many conversations take place, and I would hope that those conversations would take place.
Right. So that I take that as a yes. You did speak. Your office did speak to the Prime Minister's office about this prior to you're presenting it to Cabinet. The government website.
Mr. Poilievre, I hate to interrupt, but I think the minister said that isn't exactly what she said.
Okay, so I'll just ask her. I'll ask her then, yes or no, did your office discuss this matter with the PMO before you introduced it in Cabinet? Yes or no? If you can't answer, I can move on to another question.
Another question, Mr. Poilievre.
Okay, so she does not want to answer that question.
We'll
follow that. We'll follow that trail then. All right. Next issue is the government website says this was a $900 million project. What was the total number of job placements that the $900 million was guaranteed to create?
Mr. Chair, as I stated in my opening statement, the $19.5 million that was allocated, given to we, was for the initial 20,000 placements. There was an additional $10.5 million for the supplemental cohort. If the program had proceeded, there would have been an additional $13.53 million. So the total amount that We Charity could have received through the contribution agreement that was negotiated by the public service and We Charity was $43.53 million. The majority of the $912 million that was allocated for the program was for grants so that students would have the supports they need for post-secondary education costs.
So you originally, the government claimed that we could only get 19 million. Now you're saying 43 million. So which is it?
So as I stated publicly, Mr. Chair, it was that we would be allocated or given $19.5 million for the initial 20,000 placements. And of that $19.5 million, $5 million was for not-for-profits so that they would have the supports and ability to create placements. $300,000 was for accessibility support
that
so
wasn't
that all
the question.
students would be able to.
You said that the maximum amount we could get was $43 million. Originally, your government claimed we was only going to get $19 million. So you've got two different numbers you're working with. And then there's the third number, which is $900 million. That was the total scope of the program for which we was the sole sourced administrator. You said now that amount of money, $900 million, was to create 20,000 positions. But 20,000 positions times $5,000 per position. We can do the math right here, Mr. Chair. And we find that comes to
you were substantially over time. I'll let you finish your point, and then I'll let the minister give the explanation here in full.
20,000 positions at $5,000 maximum per position brings us to $100 million. Where does the other $800 million go?
Madam Minister, if you can give a fairly substantive answer here.
Mr. Chair, I actually reject the explanation of the member. Obviously, the member is not listening to what I am saying. When I came out publicly, I stated that $19.5 million was going to We Charities for the initial cohort of 20,000 placements. And of that $19.5 million, $5 million would be for not-for-profits so that they had the support necessary and be able to create these volunteer placements given the COVID-19 context. And $300 million was for accessibility support so that all Canadians, regardless of ability, could participate. I'm sharing today that an additional $10.5 million was provided to We Charity to administer a supplemental cohort so that smaller and local not-for-profits could participate, because there was a demand after the announcement was made. We received an influx of desire and demand for the program, so we want to make sure that they too had opportunities. I'm sharing that the contribution agreement also includes, for the second cohort, $13.53 million, provided we for an additional 20,000 placements. Should we have gotten there? We never got to that spot. It would have been after administration checks and balances were in place, like we stated in the contribution agreement. My initial comments to the public was in regards to the initial cohort of $19.5 million, and the member is welcome to go check what I shared.
Okay, we will end it there. We're substantially over. My apologies for that. Mr. Fragiskatis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for the work that you're doing and for being here. Mr. Poilievre used the phrase sole source contract. This is actually a contribution agreement, a technical distinction, but an important one. I wonder if you could just explain that for the committee.
I would actually, if suitable, will also share with my deputy to elaborate. There is a difference between contribution agreements. That is what the public service entered in with We Charity. It was not a contract. As I stated in my opening comments, the contribution agreement is what we negotiated with We Charity, and it was not a contract, as the opposition, the Conservative opposition, continues to apply. And if suitable, I would like to have my deputy share a couple comments.
Ms. Wilson? You're on mute, Gina.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. So indeed, sole source contract is incorrect terminology. And I'll just give a little bit of a flavor of the difference between a contribution agreement and a contract. So contribution agreements are regularly used by the government to further policy objectives and to engage a wide diversity of skills and resources outside the government. Their contribution agreements are not subject to procurement thresholds like service contracts. They follow terms and conditions, and they are subject to performance conditions specified in the funding agreement, audits, monitoring, and reporting requirements to ensure that all results are received. Officials negotiated an agreement for the design under this for this program under the Canada Service Corps program, an existing contribution program. Okay. And a contract is a completely different tool. Thank you.
Mr. Fragiskatis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, could you go more into why we was specifically selected as an organization, as the organization that would carry out the administration of this program? I know we're going to be hearing about this later today from Ms. Wernick. She will speak to that as well, I'm sure, but provide for us, if you could, an explanation about what was it specifically about we that stood out in terms of their ability to carry out the program as opposed to other organizations.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I would share that in the midst of this pandemic, which has been a very unprecedented and challenging times, there are numerous programs that are being provided to Canadians to ensure that they have the supports needed. Our focus has always been on Canadians and making sure mechanisms are in place. The nonpartisan and professional public service is actually delivering many programs. At that time, they were also delivering the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, in addition to numerous other programs at a greater scale than ever been seen. And I would like to assure the member that I asked the same question as to why the public service could not offer this program. Third parties have been used pre-COVID, but also during the COVID context. It was recommended that We Charity be used because they had the capacity as well as the network to be able to deliver this program. It was a recommendation that was made. I asked a lot of tough questions to see if there was others. The public service, and I'm confident that they did their due diligence, was confident that this was the only organization that could provide this program in the timeline needed, and I accepted their recommendation.
Mr. Fragiskatis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, was there any directive that came from the Prime Minister's office, from the Prime Minister himself, about the need to choose we as the charity that would administer this particular program?
I was not directed by the Prime Minister's office. What I did know is that my focus was on students and youth. We wanted to connect young people who have been rolling up their sleeves with service opportunities and not-for-profits that had an increased demand of their services. It's something we turned over to the public service as to how can we deliver this program. They have worked with numerous organizations, as I have been also communicating with, and they make it a recommendation that We Charity would be the organization able to deliver this program within the timeline needed, with the scope and scale and magnitude that we were desiring. It's a very innovative program and had received quite a positive response.
Finally, Mr. Chair, I'd like to know what will happen now that We is no longer charged with the task of carrying out the administration of the program. What is being planned for? What will become of the Canada Student Service Grant? And what is the message to organizations that wanted to participate, and indeed to young student volunteers or would-be volunteers that wanted to make a contribution as we try to face the post-COVID-19 recovery?
Madam Minister.
Mr. Chair, I would like Canadians to know that our government and I remain committed to students to have these additional supports and opportunities. And for not-for-profits, we know that there is an increased demand for your services. We are committed to finding ways, innovative ways to deliver this program. I can assure you that my team and the public service is working around the clock to have opportunities and options available so that this program does go ahead. We recognize that there is a need. We've heard it with the messages and communications we are receiving from not-for-profits and students. So we remain committed to seeing this program delivered to help students in this very challenging times, as well as not-for-profits.
Thank you both. Mr. Fortin will be followed by Mr. Angus. Mr. Fortin, the floor is yours. Your mute's on. You're muted.
Madame la ministre, bonjour. Vous nous dites que vous avez parlé avec personne du bureau du premier ministre avant de recommander au Conseil des ministres We Charity et que cette recommandation-là vous venait de Madame Wilson. J'ai bien compris? Pas Mme Wilson, Mme Rachel Warnick, je m'excuse.
Ms. Warnick.
Oui, OK. Êtes-vous au courant avec qui Mme Warnick a parlé avant d'en venir à la conclusion qu'elle devait vous recommander We Charity?
Madam Minister. You're muted.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La fonction publique impartiale a clairement indiqué qu'il s'agissait de la seule organisation capable de fournir ce service.
La question est qui?
Dans le délai requis, je vais prendre le temps que vous avez pris à demander la question.
Mais ça, c'est du violon. Répondez.
Mr. Fortin, the Minister has the floor. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. OK.
Comme j'ai partagé, c'était Rachel Warnick qui m'a donné une recommandation de la service public et j'ai accepté la recommandation. Je connais et je pense que tout le monde sait que Rachel Warnick serait ici comme témoin après moi et c'est des questions que tous les membres du comité peuvent demander à elle directement.
Est-ce que vous avez participé à des discussions? Est-ce que vous avez participé, Madame la ministre, à des discussions avec Mme Warnick et d'autres fonctionnaires relativement à cette recommandation-là, avant de l'amener à la table du Conseil?
C'était mon équipe qui a continué d'avoir les conversations avec la fonction publique. Nous avons eu un goût d'aider les étudiantes et les OBLN et on a leur demandé de nous donner des recommandations, des idées. Ils ont fait une recommandation que c'était l'organisation.
Okay, je comprends que vous n'avez pas participé à des discussions. Pourquoi oui, Service Jeunesse Canada, qui était l'organisme qui chapeautait tout ça en 2018, comment se fait-il qu'ils sont plus là en 2020, qu'ils sont exclus de l'équation?
Encore une fois, Monsieur le Président, c'était une recommandation qui était me donnée par la fonction publique et j'ai accepté la recommandation que c'était la seule organisation capable de fournir ce service dans le délai requis. S'il y a plusieurs questions pour le service public, je connais, tout le monde connaît que Mme Warnick serait ici après moi et je pense que c'est les questions pour elle.
Est-ce que vous, personnellement, vous avez soulevé la question de savoir pourquoi Service Jeunesse Canada n'était plus, semble-t-il, apte à gérer ce programme-là. Vous, personnellement, là.
Monsieur le Président, oui, j'ai demandé ces questions. J'en ai demandé plusieurs de questions pour assurer le succès de ce programme. Et donc, les recommandations qu'ils ont me données après plusieurs de questions, plusieurs de discussions, étaient que c'était l'organisation qui était capable. Donc, j'ai accepté leurs recommandations.
À qui avez-vous soulevé la question de savoir pourquoi Service Jeunesse Canada n'était plus dans la partie?
Monsieur le Président, j'ai eu ces discussions avec plusieurs de membres de la service public. Rachel Warnick était une de ces personnes. Ma députée est ici aussi et elle sait que j'ai demandé ces questions. Et elle peut partager quelques mots si vous voulez.
Avez-vous soulevé cette question-là avec quelqu'un du bureau du Premier ministre?
Monsieur le Président, j'ai travaillé avec le service public, de fonction publique, pour recevoir ces réponses parce que c'était à la fonction publique de me donner une recommandation pour fournir ce service-là.
Vous savez qu'en janvier 2018, notre premier ministre était très fier de dire que Service Jeunesse Canada était l'organisme hors pair pour gérer ce programme-là et avec le concours de 10 autres organisations. Comment se fait-il? Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé entre janvier 2018 et avril 2020 pour que Service Jeunesse Canada et les autres organismes soient évacués du processus?
Minister.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais demander à ma députée de répondre à ces questions parce que...
Mais j'aimerais savoir si vous le savez. Est-ce que vous le savez?
Pourquoi? Ce qui était partagé avec moi et que les demandes sur l'organisation étaient plus grandes pour qu'ils pouvaient fournir ce programme ici. Donc, ils ont regardé d'autres options et c'est pourquoi ils ont fait les recommandations qu'ils ont fait. Mais le fonction publique, il connaît mieux que moi pourquoi ils ont fait ces recommandations.
Mais à votre avis, Service Jeunesse Canada n'était plus apte à gérer le programme?
Je pense que Service Jeunesse Canada fait de bon travail, mais on aussi sait que c'est un nouveau programme. Donc, les demandes sont très grandes et la pandémie a nous démontré que les demandes sont plus grandes qu'on n'a jamais vu. Donc, je pense qu'on doit écouter s'ils ont besoin ou ils sont capables ou non.
En quoi oui est plus compétent que Service Jeunesse Canada pour gérer le programme?
Comme était partagé avec moi par la fonction publique, était que We Charity a la capacité et le network nécessaire pour faire ce programme ici parce qu'on voulait que plusieurs de jeunes Canadiens et plusieurs de OBLN peuvent être partie de ce programme. La vision était que tout le monde qui veut participer peut participer. Donc, la vision était très grande. C'était un programme qui...
Okay, we will have to end it there, but we'll give Ms. Wilson a chance if she wants to add further to what the minister said on that previous point. Ms. Wilson?
Mr. Chair, thank you. The program Mr. Fortin is referring to is the Canada Service Corps. It's a program that continues and in fact was enhanced to some degree as well, so that everyone that's involved with the Canada Service Corps are working very, very hard. Thank you.
Okay, then we'll turn to Charlie Angus, who will be followed by Mr. Barrett. Mr. Angus.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Great to be on committee with you again, and good to see you, Madam Mistress. Mr. Chair, is it possible to make sure we maintain the short question, short answers? Because I only have 6 minutes, and I don't want to.
I will try and endeavor to do that. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Today, the Ethics Commissioner announced an investigation into Minister Bill Morneau. So that is 2 ethics investigations, unprecedented, Finance Minister and the sitting Prime Minister. And this happened on your watch, Minister, because you brought this $900 million program to Cabinet. When you brought it forward for discussion, were you aware of the family links between the Trudeau family and we, and the Morneau family and we?
Madam Minister.
Mr. Chair, my focus was really on making sure that there was an additional support for young Canadians, for students.
That's not the question.
And that's
the question,
why it was
aware?
part of the suite of programs that we put forward. When I brought the proposal forward, first of all, it should be known that the Prime Minister, prior to myself, was the Minister of Youth. It is a portfolio that he kept on.
That's not
when
the
he was
question.
Prime Minister, he was also the critic for youth, because Canadians are well aware that when it comes
to
to
Mr. Angus. Mr. Angus.
I don't think I had the same amount of time.
Minister, you failed them. You failed. You were not aware of the family links, and you brought this? This is astounding. We now have a serious scandal, and it happened on your watch. So the Prime Minister said that it was raised when he spoke about recusing. So were you the one? You had the responsibility. Did you say, hey, Mr. Prime Minister, your family's got links here? Were you the one to call the Prime Minister to get recused?
Madam Minister.
The Prime Minister has acknowledged that he should have recused himself. He has apologized, because what has been left is that students do not have service opportunities right now, and not-for-profits are not able to have the access they're looking to. We continue to stay focused on delivering this program. When it comes to the investigations by the Officer of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, we have stated that we will comply with any information that he requires.
Well, I'm glad you're going to comply. Now, you said you asked a lot of tough questions, and I find that surprising based on your last answer. The Prime Minister's wife is an ambassador for we. After Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister, his mother was hired by we, as was his brother. So there was a clear financial link, but their relationship was evident. So in the due diligence, did anyone in your department raise a red flag that this was going to be a problem? Was this raised as an issue?
Madam Minister.
I believe that Mr. Chair, I believe that the department can speak for themselves. Obviously,
no,
we have
I'm
tough
asking
conversations.
You're responsible for this. Don't throw your
Charlie,
under the bus.
Mr. Angus, Mr. Angus, the Minister has the floor to answer the question. Go ahead, Minister, your answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, of course, we have tough conversations around the cabinet table. We have tough conversations around our teams. Yes, these questions were posed. Our focus was on delivering a program for students to be able to volunteer, provide service opportunities in communities, and link them with not-for-profits that were looking for much-needed support. And therefore, that was my focus. Yes, I asked tough questions of the public service. When we made this decision, when the public service recommended that it was the only organization that would be able to deliver this program, we continued to have tough conversations, and then finally I accepted their recommendation.
Mr. Angus. Back to Mr. Angus.
So I think I heard you say that it was raised, that it was a problem. His family was so closely tied. So someone raised it, and yet you failed to bring this to cabinet, and this thing blew up in your government's face. So what my question is, you mentioned originally 19.5, and now it's 43 something. This is a very complex process. So for each placement, what was the figure that we would get for each placement?
Madam Minister.
Mr. Chair, the way the contribution agreement is written, and as you know, that the contribution agreements are disclosed publicly quarterly, so it will become available. The contribution agreement for the initial cohort was $19.5 million.
I know that, but how much were they paid?
Mr. Chair, I think it's
just
if I can listen to the question, I think
Angus,
you should be able to listen to the answer.
Could we have a little order from both sides at the moment?
I'm going to move on.
I'll give the Minister 15 more seconds to answer that question. Go ahead, Madam Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as I publicly stated, $19.5 million was for We Charity for the initial 20,000 placements. $10.5 million was for the supplement cohort, knowing that local not-for-profits wanted to participate. Because the committee is asking information, I've added information to make sure that information is available for...
Okay, back to Mr. Angus.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Monsieur le Président, l'interprète ne peut pas travailler L'interprète ne peut pas travailler quand les gens parlent en même temps.
Is this a point of order, Mr. Fortin?
C'est un point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président. Je demanderais à ce qu'il y ait un peu de discipline parce que l'interprète ne peut pas me traduire ce que les deux personnes disent en même temps. Alors, en tout respect pour la ministre et mon collègue, M. Angus, j'aimerais qu'on ait un peu de... C'est déjà difficile de traduire. Moi, je vois les lèvres bouger pendant 30 secondes avant d'entendre quelques mots. Alors, j'aimerais que l'interprète qui me parle soit en mesure de le faire correctement. Donc, s'il vous plaît, un peu plus lentement.
Okay, I don't. Your point has been made.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, it's Carolyn. If I can just say, if Mr. Angus could hold the mic closer to his mouth, that would make the interpreter's job a little bit easier when he's speaking, just as a heads up.
Okay, we'll not take that time from you there, Mr. Angus. You've got time for a couple of quick questions. Go ahead.
Okay, so I did ask what the per student placement fee was. The minister refused to answer, so I think that's an outstanding question. I want to ask about whether or not they got a legal opinion on this, because if a student, post-secondary student, master's student goes to work doing data entry, which is one of their positions, work 70 hours, they get zero. If they work 170 hours, they get 60% less than minimum wage. Did the minister get a legal opinion whether having people do paid work and paying them less than minimum wage? Did anyone in her department raise a red flag about that? If they weren't raising red flags about the Trudeau family's connections, were they raising red flags that this might not even be legal and would put charities in a potential liability situation?
Madam Minister, there's two questions there. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, on the preamble, I guess, that the member has provided, it varies to the amount of hours that a student would to volunteer that would determine how much each placement would cost, because obviously grants were between $1,000 and $5,000, as we have shared publicly. Secondly, when it comes to the legal opinion, I'm confident that the public service, who works really hard and has really been working with the government to deliver these
Mr. Angus, Mr. Angus, order. The minister needs time and a little peace and quiet in order for us to hear the answer. Madam Minister.
So I'm confident that the public service would have done their due diligence and would have requested legal opinions. And I think what's important to note is the difference between employment opportunities and volunteer opportunities. This was about service opportunities within communities. As someone who has been volunteering in her community since I was 13 years old, we know that volunteering and providing service opportunities are an opportunity to develop and strengthen skills. Some of these opportunities would actually allow young people to...
As Minister, you didn't
We will have to end it there to you both, and we'll turn to a 5-minute round, and we only have room for 2 5-minute rounds. We'll go to Mr. Barrett first, and then Ms. Koutrakis. Mr. Barrett, the floor is yours.
Minister, is there a competitive process used in awarding contribution agreements?
I'll refer to my deputy.
Ms. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there are different mechanisms to actually award a contribution agreement. The first one would be a call for proposals. However, we determined at the time that a call for proposals, open call, would take about 2 to 3 months at minimum to actually get something in place. We could have done a limited call for proposals, which would have probably taken
Mr. Chair, I'll reclaim my time there.
I'm going to, I think that's a very substantive answer, Mr. Barrett. I'll not take time away from you, but I think we need to hear the answer. Go ahead, Ms. Wilson.
I was just wrapping up with that. So an actual call for proposals would take several months to move forward with, and we needed to get this program off the ground very quickly, because at the time of the pandemic and the severity of the pandemic, students were graduating. Thank you.
Back to Mr. Barrett.
Okay, so there was no competitive process used in this place, though there was one that was available. I want to confirm, Minister Chagger, are you the minister responsible for this program?
Madam Minister.
Yes, I am the minister responsible for the program, and that's why the recommendation that the public service made to myself, after a lot of rigor and discussion and questions and answers,
Is Ms. Wernick with your ministry, Minister?
Ms. Wernick is with ESDC.
Why didn't the ESDC minister introduce this proposal to Cabinet then?
As the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth, my responsibilities actually are part of multiple departments, and this is part of the responsibilities that I have been given.
Which department was responsible for developing this program then?
Madam Minister.
What's that branch? ESDC.
I'm not sure.
I was just going to get you the name, Skills and Employment Branch of ESDC.
Okay. Who was working on the background and resources to implement this program?
I understand that Ms. Wernick will be appearing after myself, and she would be able to provide a more substantial answer.
Okay. Was it written on the memorandum that only We Charity could deliver this program?
It was a recommendation that was provided to me in writing. After a lot of rigor and discussion, I accepted the recommendation. Yes, it was provided to me in writing.
The question was it only We Charity that was recommended?
When the public service made a recommendation to myself, yes, it was the organization that was recommended.
Were you given any options as to how this program could be administered or which organizations could administer it? Options?
I asked numerous questions for options, and after the public service did their due diligence, it was a recommendation that We Charity was the organization, the only organization that could deliver the program in the timeline needed to the scale that we desired.
How was the decision to award We Charity to implement this program taken if no other organizations were presented as options?
Mr. Chair, I think it's also important to acknowledge that we are in an unprecedented and challenging time with the pandemic. We know that all countries are facing challenges. It's something we've never had to address, including the public service. The public service, I'm confident, did their due diligence, made a recommendation. I accepted their recommendation.
Did you discuss awarding this program to
Mr. Barrett?
Equal time, Chair?
You're getting equal time. I'm watching the time very close, but it makes it a lot more difficult when members interrupt. It takes time away. I'll give you that time back while I was speaking, but go ahead. Question.
Did you discuss awarding this program to We with Prime Minister Trudeau or Minister Bill Morneau?
I personally did not have those conversations. I had those conversations with departmental officials, asked for what options were available and why this recommendation was coming forward.
Back to Mr. Barrett.
Did you discuss the program with anyone at We before discussing it at Cabinet?
I did not discuss this program, the CSSG program, with anyone at We.
Did anyone in your office discuss the program with We before you discussed it at Cabinet?
So once again, Mr. Chair, we wanted students to be able to have service opportunities. We knew that not-for-profits had an increased demand for their services. It's something we turned over to the public service. The public service was able to take the vision and then make a recommendation. I'm confident they did their due diligence. They made a recommendation. I accepted the recommendation.
Last question, Mr. Barrett.
What are the names of the individuals who negotiated the termination of this agreement?
You can.
Sorry, I was just referring to my deputy as to being able to provide the member a substantial answer. They will be available on the next panel. So those are questions that Ms. Wernick and Ms. Wilson will be able to answer in the next panel.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Mr. Barrett, we're out of time. Turning then to Annie Kotrakis, will be the last question before the minister has to leave. Ms. Kotrakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to begin by commending the Ministry of Diversion, Inclusion and Youth, as well as the public servants at ESDC and the Department of Canadian Heritage for their work on designing the CSSG. This is truly an innovative program, and I can only imagine a considerable amount of creativity and outside of the box thinking from everyone who was involved. At a time when charities are struggling like never before, a program like this is essential. The $900 million in student grants would have translated to roughly 90 million hours of volunteer work and would undeniably help charities close the frontline service gap that currently exists. Additionally, the maximum of 43 million administrative costs to compensate We Charity, if all 900 million were distributed, represents less than 5% of the total program cost, which in my opinion is well within the norm of project management and administrative fees for such programs, especially given the tight timelines. I want to begin, Minister Chagger, can you highlight the intentions and objectives of the CSSG? With over 35,000 applicants, how effective was the program in encouraging volunteerism at a time when so many charities and communities are struggling, with donations down by about 50%?
Madam Minister.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank the member for the acknowledgement of the very challenging and unprecedented time that we all find ourselves in. The public service, just like the government and all members of Parliament, have been working around the clock, as have been Canadians. This was really another program within the suite of programs that we put forward for students and youth. We know that COVID-19 has impacted all Canadians and disproportionately impacted the most vulnerable, and youth are no exception. We know that young people have been rolling up their sleeves and giving back to communities to help heal communities during this challenging time. So this was really about ensuring that young people, students, were being rewarded for the service opportunities, not only within their community, but by having a virtual platform, being able to help heal their own communities, but also virtually helping other communities. When we actually launched the program, immediately there was a massive demand for this program. We saw 35,000 applications submitted by students wanting to participate. The conversations continue. Students want to see this program delivered. Not-for-profits want the support, and that's why I am committed to seeing this program be delivered. Our focus remains on Canadians. Our focus remains on vulnerable Canadians, and that's exactly why when the contribution agreement was negotiated, we ensured that we were collecting disaggregated data to ensure that the most vulnerable in our society were having an opportunity to give back and heal communities. This is a very innovative program, but volunteers, as we know, from coast to coast to coast, are instrumental to the work that they do, and they should not go unrecognized. And this was one way of not only thanking them for their service, but rewarding students, because we know that the financial burden on them come post-secondary education costs in the fall would be high, and we just were providing a grant to help them out during this very challenging time.
Ms. Katrakis.
How common is it, Minister Chagger, for third-party organizations to work alongside the federal government when delivering programs such as this? And what are the benefits that are created to these partnerships?
Mr. Chair, it is not uncommon for the Government of Canada to work with third parties to deliver specialized programs, and working with third-party delivery agents to deliver emergency funding throughout the pandemic has proven to be an effective approach. We partnered with the United Way in May to deliver the Emergency Community Support Fund to support vulnerable populations. We partnered with Food Banks Canada to fight food insecurity. Officials recommended that we work with a third party, and that the third party be We Charity to administer the CSSG, given the extensive reach with students and their capacity as an organization to deliver this program within the timeline needed. We've been acting and working very quickly to ensure that we're responding to the needs and challenges that Canadians are facing.
Ms. Katrakis.
Just final thoughts. Again, I wanted to commend the public service, the work that you're doing, Minister Chagger. I know everybody, all Canadians are looking to find ways to help one another. And I could not be more proud than the work that our government has tried to do in such short timelines to make sure that everybody that needs the help is there. We were not looking for perfection. We were looking to be effective and to get the help out there that we need. Perhaps things could have been done along the way differently, but I think the intent, what was intended with this program, is there for everybody to see. And I hope that we go forward with it and it helps the young people as it should.
Madam Minister, any final thoughts? You or your deputy, you want to answer that comment?
I will share my time with my deputy and provide her an opportunity as well. I echo the comments that were just shared. This has been really about all Canadians working together and stepping up, all members of parties, all members of parliament and all parties and all levels of government, because it is all of us that are in it together to ensure that we fight this pandemic. The health and safety of Canadians has always been our priority. It remains my priority, and I'm confident that that is the goal of everyone, because we want to see us succeed. And I believe that when it comes to this program, it was in response to a direct needs that we were hearing from Canadians from coast to coast to coast, including not-for-profits that do very important work. And I think it's important that we recognize the work of volunteers and especially young people who have been stepping up. And this is one way to provide a grant and a reward to appreciate them during this very challenging time. A lot has been taken away from individuals because of this pandemic, and youth are no exception. Deputy?
Deputy, we'll give you about half a minute. We have to run.
I won't take long. So just wanted to acknowledge my fellow public servants, who, particularly those at ESDC, because in the midst of the severity of this pandemic, officials have been essentially working around the clock to deliver new emergency supports and payments to Canadians, such as the CERB and many, many other initiatives. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay, then thank you, Madam Minister and Ms. Wilson, for your appearance today and your answering questions under somewhat tough circumstances on these timelines. And as well, I do commend the public servants on the efforts they've been making on the COVID-19 pandemic. So with that, we will suspend for 2 minutes. And then we'll turn to the next panel with witnesses from the Department of Canadian Heritage and the Department of Employment and Social Development. Meeting suspended. Thank you, Minister.
Merci à tous. Merci d'avoir move.
Number 41, the second panel of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. And as everyone knows, we are meeting on government spending, We Charity, and the Canada Student Service Grant. Today's meeting is taking place by video conference, and proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So for this panel, then we have with the Department of Canadian Heritage, again, Ms. Wilson, who was with us in the first panel, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Diversity and Inclusion and Youth, and from the Department of Employment and Social Development, Rachel Wernick, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Skills and Employment Branch, and Stephanie Hebert, Assistant Deputy Minister, Program Operations Branch. I believe, Ms. Wernick, you have an opening statement. I believe it's you. It's Ms. Wilson. Okay, Ms. Wilson, you have an opening statement, and then we will go to questions. Just a heads up for the questions set up once Ms. Wilson is done. We'll start with Mr. Polyev, on to Ms. Zerowitz, on to Mr. Fortin, and Mr. Julian. Go ahead, Ms. Wilson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would like to share my opening statement time with Rachel Wernick, and she can follow me right after. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Kwe, bonjour. I'm very pleased to be here and able to join you from Algonquin Territory today. I'd like to thank the members of this committee for your continued work during these challenging times. My remarks will be twofold. First of all, I want to provide some context on how the public service responded to the challenges posed by COVID-19 as it delivered emergency measures and supports for the government. I will then speak about the measures the government has taken to support young Canadians during the COVID-19 pandemic.
And Ms. Wilson, I believe I'm going to have to say the same thing I said to your minister. Just slow down a little bit to give the translators an opportunity.
Got you. And they also have my remarks. So, Mr. Chair, Back in March and April, when the severity of the pandemic became obvious, the Government of Canada focused its efforts on providing Canadians with help as quickly as possible. I know that at Employment and Social Development, the priority was to establish, implement, and quickly distribute the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, or the CERB, working with Canada Revenue Agency, as well as putting in place other much-needed supports, such as the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. My public service colleagues worked around the clock to support the government's response and to help Canadians when they needed them the most. At the same time, Mr. Chair, ESDC was adjusting to new ways of working, with most employees working from home as provinces and territories implemented lockdown measures. Some employees were also facing concerns about their own health and safety and the spread of COVID-19. Despite these challenges, the department was able to deliver quickly and efficiently, but we cannot ignore the fact that these are unprecedented times for Canadians, and they are also unprecedented times for public servants. Mr. Chair, young people are also facing challenges during this pandemic. In response to the government's desire to develop a comprehensive package to help students, there was a general call out to relevant departments to provide options to enhance existing youth and/or student-related programs, including ESDC. A series of student measures were being pulled together to make up a student package, and the government wanted it to include a volunteer service component. On April 22nd, the Prime Minister announced a range of measures to assist students during this crisis, including enhancement to the Canada Service Corps program delivered by ESDC and the new Canada Student Service Grant. Officials were seized with quickly determining how best to design and implement a new program that met the government's objectives and the broad parameters established by the announcement. Mr. Chair, three things were clear to the public service. One, in the COVID-19 context, it was important to move forward as quickly as possible. This initiative aimed to support students in contributing safely to their communities over the summer, and then recognizing that service in the fall through a financial reward that would help them pay for their studies. Two, the imperative to find a fast and effective mechanism to engage not-for-profit organizations in all parts of the country, many of whom were struggling at that time to provide service to their communities. They were, and many still are, Mr. Chair, responding to a great increase in needs and could benefit from volunteers to help out. And three, the program had to be easily accessible to all students and effectively bring in students from underrepresented groups. It had to involve a diversity of students and a diversity of not-for-profit organizations, large and small, from every part of the country. It was determined that a third party, funded through a contribution agreement, would be the most effective and efficient delivery approach. Contribution agreements are not sole source service contracts, nor are they procurements. Contribution agreements are regularly used under the transfer payment policy.
Point d'ordre. Je me permets simplement de souligner que l'interprète est obligé de courir derrière le témoin. S'il vous plaît, juste ralentir un petit peu.
I'm not getting the translation myself from you, Mr. Fortin. The translator.
J'ai dit que l'interprète est obligé de courir derrière le témoin. J'aimerais juste qu'on ralentisse un peu le débit, à moins que ce soit pas important, mais si c'est important, peut-être ralentir un petit peu. Merci.
I did ask Ms. Wilson, slow down a little, Ms. Wilson, and I believe I'm told your mic may be a little too close to your lips. Pull it out a little. The joys of the new system. Ms. Wilson, go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Fortin.
Indeed, and I will definitely speak more slowly. And I'm just about to wrap up anyways. So under a contribution agreement, the government sets the high-level funding parameters, including the objectives, desired outcomes, eligible expenditures, and performance measurement. However, the government does not direct or dictate how the recipient will carry out the project under a contribution agreement. Recipients have the flexibility to design projects that further government policy objectives according to their experience and expertise. The use of contribution agreements enables the government to engage a wide diversity of skills and resources. Mr. Chair, the public service has been working relentlessly to mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus and protect families' health and financial security. Thank you, merci, miigwech, and I will ask Rachel to share my time. Thank you.
Ms. Warnick, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon.
And take your time.
In order to assist the committee, I will limit my opening remarks to providing the context and rationale behind the department's recommendation to Minister Chagger to enter into a contribution agreement with We Charity. I would like to underscore the time frame I can assist you with is prior to any discussion among ministers of Minister Chagger's recommendation to them. I will steer clear of cabinet confidences. It is important to note that the Canada Student Service Grant was embedded in an ongoing discussion of a broad package of potential measures to help students and youth deal with the impacts of the pandemic. It was never going to be the only measure. On April 8th, changes to the Canada Summer Jobs Program were announced. Interactions and the potential for overlap with the design and delivery of existing programs and new emergency measures had to be worked out. The package came together as policy in the Prime Minister's announcement of April 22nd. I was asked mid-April by my Associate Deputy Minister at ESTC and a Department of Finance official to provide information, analysis, and assessment of potential options for including service opportunities in the student package. The finance official indicated that the Prime Minister would announce the student package in the coming days and cited Saturday, April 18th as the likely date. For these discussions with Department of Finance officials, I drew on work my team had undertaken in March to assess the potential to enhance programming offered under the Canada Service Corps. On April 22nd, the Prime Minister announced at his daily news conference a comprehensive package of support of nearly $9 billion for post-secondary students and recent graduates. I learned the final contents of the package from the announcement. Cet ensemble comprenait deux mesures liées au bénévolat chez les jeunes. La première était un investissement supplémentaire accordé au programme Service Jeunesse Canada pour accroître le nombre de micro-subventions offertes aux jeunes, passant de 1 800 à 15 000, à proposer des allocations aux participants. La deuxième était la nouvelle bourse canadienne pour le bénévolat étudiant. Ce nouveau programme permettrait de verser jusqu'à 5 000 aux étudiants pour leurs frais de scolarité à l'automne en échange de leur bénévolat. After the announcement, I asked my Department of Finance colleagues if they could help us flesh out the details. They told me that the initiative needed to be launched by mid-May, and the program parameters focused on two key elements: a web-based digital platform that would allow students to apply for the program, to be matched with volunteering opportunities in their community, and to track their hours. A grant of up to $5,000 for volunteer hours completed. There were several objectives for the initiative. The first was to facilitate the involvement of students in contributing to the COVID-19 response in their communities through volunteering over the summer. The second was to provide a financial award to recognize this contribution and to help students cover the costs of their studies in the fall, as well as to incentivize students to volunteer. The third was to provide students with skills and experience that would help them in pursuing their careers. Members of my team and myself met with members of Minister Chagger's staff and with officials at central agencies to further understand the desired outcomes of the initiative. It became quickly evident that there was high ambition, not only for the speed of implementation in roughly 3 weeks, but for the scope and scale of the initiative. The minister's staff indicated that volunteering opportunities needed to be available in every province and territory and in large and small urban and rural communities. The minister's staff also communicated to the team that it was imperative to ensure that youth from a wide diversity of backgrounds would be encouraged and able to participate, including racialized, Indigenous, LGBTQ2 youth, and youth with disabilities. There was a long list of design and implementation considerations that the team needed to analyze in pulling together advice on how to implement this ambitious vision within 3 weeks. First and foremost, it was the pandemic context, with health and safety top of mind. There were significant concerns about community spread, as youth had been identified as high-risk demographic for spreading the virus. Public health advisories were being updated daily on requirements for physical distancing. Keeping students and communities safe was the top priority for the team. The pandemic was also impacting the capacity of the department for any form of direct delivery. In late April, the department, including its delivery arm, Service Canada, was completely consumed with other emergency measures. Officials were working around the clock to get emergency payments out to Canadians. The next significant consideration was the capacity of the not-for-profit sector organizations that were under stress and stretched to deliver on their mandates. Although volunteers can help, they need orientation and oversight and digital supports to be able to contribute in a safe physical distancing context, all of which requires time, effort, and resources for the organization hosting the volunteers. Interaction between recently announced emergency supports and payments was another key consideration. Given students could be receiving the Canada Emergency Response Benefit or the Canada Emergency Student Benefit, and some not-for-profits could be eligible for the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, the team needed to determine eligibility that would be fair and equitable without creating disincentives for students to undertake paid employment. Dans mon rôle, je travaillais également sur une proposition qui visait à accroître le nombre d'emplois offerts aux jeunes et à mettre en œuvre de nouvelles mesures de souplesse pour les employeurs en vertu du programme Emploi d'été Canada. The analysis was also happening in a context where public and media attention was raising concerns about CERB payments and issues of risk mitigation to ensure no one would get the payment who should not. The team had to ensure the design maximized the ability for strong oversight and due diligence. Our experience with the Canada Service Corps program had taught us many things about the key ingredients for a successful youth service initiative. First, to engage in service, the majority of youth, and in particular youth who are underrepresented and from groups facing barriers, require additional supports, ranging from orientation to mentoring to wraparound supports. Secondly, the biggest influencers of youth are other youth. The success of the initiative required a strong start, where a large number of meaningful opportunities were available to immediately grab youth's interests, so they would spread the word with their friends. Youth do not come to government websites, no matter how well we build them. There was a need for active outreach to find youth where they are, promotion and communications tailored to a younger audience and that would reach them through all social media platforms was essential. L'objectif visait à créer une plateforme numérique permettant l'enregistrement des étudiants et des organisations à but non lucratif, incluant la saisie directe des renseignements, la comptabilisation et le suivi des heures, le jumelage des étudiants et des occasions de bénévolat. Pour ce faire, il a fallu analyser les capacités technologiques nécessaires, la manière dont la plateforme répondrait à toutes les exigences du gouvernement en matière de bilinguisme, d'accessibilité et de protection des données personnelles, ainsi que la façon de garantir que le système
Monsieur le Président, je ne sais pas si
I've lost you.
Decided the ideal would be an entity that this coordinating entity
there we go.
In meeting.
Sorry, Ms. Warnick, go ahead. We lost you for a moment. Go ahead.
Massive speed. Reach and my.
We are not picking you up for some reason. How close to the end of your remarks? Madam Clerk, can we get a technician to get in touch with Ms. Wernick. We're not picking her up.
Sorry, I'm working on it right now. Someone's reaching out to her immediately, and hopefully we can get this sorted out as soon as possible. It's up to you if you'd like to suspend in the meantime. It's entirely up to you.
Let's suspend for 2 minutes in case people want to go and get a glass of water or something. So we'll suspend for 2 minutes and then come back. Meeting suspended. Ms. Warnick, and if we could wrap up pretty quickly, it would be helpful. Go ahead, the floor is yours.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I did provide my remarks in both English and French to the clerk, and I ask that they be put on the record, please.
Okay, so you're ready to go?
Yes.
Then thank you both for your presentations. We'll start with
Oh,
first.
no, Minister Chair, sorry.
Okay.
I was going to finish. I just was commenting that
okay.
I had provided the written. I would like to finish my remarks if you permit.
Yep. Go ahead. If you can wrap up fairly rapidly, go ahead. Floor is yours.
Okay. The third party needed massive speed, reach, and scale, and an ability to quickly mobilize the whole country. The third party needed a demonstrated track record mobilizing youth for service and to be technologically strong. Some of the bodies we considered and set aside were small advocacy groups with no program delivery experience. Other organizations did not have experience with youth, nor did they have strong technological capacity, and many had never delivered a program of such complexity. I did engage We Charity as a potential partner, letting them know the broad parameters of what the government was looking for. They were an obvious option as the largest youth service charity in Canada with high technological capacity and a Facebook following of 4 million youth. They had already provided to several officials and ministers a proposal related to social entrepreneurship for youth and indicated it could be adapted as needed. On April 22nd, We Charity sent me a detailed proposal to quickly develop tens of thousands of volunteer placements for youth within a few weeks. Given the need for speed and scale, I determined with my team and colleagues that their draft proposal was the best available option in the time we had to work with. The team proceeded to work up the proposed initiative in a form that could be vetted by central agencies and considered by Cabinet. I sent the draft Cabinet proposal to the Deputy Minister for approval, and her office sent it on to the Minister in early May. To be clear, the Department's recommendation was that a contribution agreement with We Charity to mobilize other not-for-profit partners was the best available option given the requirement for speed, scope, scale, and to reach a broad diversity of youth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Warnick. So we will now go to questions, be a 6-minute round. First up, Mr. Poilievre, then Ms. Zerowitz. Mr. Poilievre, floor is yours.
Ms. Warnick, you said that the We Charity sent a proposal to ministers and officials for a social entrepreneurship program. Then you described how that proposal converted through your recommendation into this Canada Student Service Grant. To how many officials and ministers did we originally send this proposal?
Mr. Chair, I don't have that information in front of me, but I'm happy to provide that in writing to the committee.
Who first informed you that we had made this proposal to the government?
So We Charity, as I mentioned, I reached out to them in the context of exploring options,
right,
and they told me about the proposal. I was also aware, because we had prepared a briefing note for Minister Chagger, that she had received a copy of the proposal, and We Charity mentioned that they had shared it with Minister Ng. I would like to clarify for the committee that this was a separate proposal, but when I was provided a new proposal, it had adapted that one, which had been developed over some time, to adapt to the new parameters set out by the government in the announcement.
Mr. Poilievre.
And when did you first hear of the We Charity proposal?
When I spoke with We Charity in the lead up to the announcement.
On what date?
I spoke to the We Charity on April 19th.
So April 19th, you spoke to them, and that was the first time you heard about the We Charity proposal?
To the best of my recollection, however, it is true that proposal had been shared with ministers.
When?
So as I have said, Mr. Chair, we will provide those details in writing.
Did anyone ever tell you whether any ministers had opinions about the We Charity proposal? Prior to your recommending in favor of it?
I need to clarify, Mr. Chair, that the proposal I'm speaking about is a different proposal that I believe was adapted following the announcement and submitted.
Right. And so my question, again, it doesn't change. Can you answer it, please?
I'm sorry, can you repeat? It's not clear to me what the question is.
Did anyone tell you the opinions of any of the ministers on this proposal that We Charity had circulated within Cabinet?
I have no recollection of that.
All right. So now we know that this whole thing originated with We, and that it was then adapted slightly to meet the political demands of the government. And so who was it that told you to work on a Canada Student Grant like this? Was it your deputy?
Mr. Chair, as I explained in my remarks, there was, in a very brief time, in the context of the crisis back in April, there was a few days. There were a few. If I could finish, if
yeah, just to Mr. Poilievre, give the Ms. Warnick the time to respond, if you could. We'll not take time away from you. Go ahead, Ms. Warnick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was a very rapid period of a few days in which officials were working very hard to quickly assess options and possibilities for a student and youth package announcement. It was in that context that I was asked by my Associate Deputy Minister and in collaboration with officials at the Department of Finance to provide some options, assessments, information, given my lead on the Canada Service Corps program.
Okay, this is
file.
sort of way off of my, so it sounds like it was an associate deputy minister who asked you to do that. So that was all I needed to know. There was a proposal from we. Who first gave you that proposal?
The proposal, I received a proposal, Mr. Chair, I received a proposal from Craig Kielberger on April 22nd.
On April 22nd, and did he just call you?
I received it by email, Mr. Chair.
Did he mention if he had spoken to other members of the government about it?
I have no recollection of that.
And the proposal at that time, was it for the government to provide a grant for volunteer positions?
To the best of my recollection, no, it was emphasizing still some placements for youth related to entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, and additional placements for youth related to service in their communities.
And how many total, in the final proposal that went through cabinet, the Canada, how many positions was were going to be created for the proposed budget of $912 million?
So, Mr. Chair, as you know, I'm not able to speak to cabinet confidence of what's in a cabinet document.
No, but the proposal, it was made public. There's a public proposal to spend $912 million on creating student service grants. How many students would have had positions?
The way that the proposal was designed was that of the, as was mentioned earlier, I think there was an envelope of funding put against payment of grants. The payment of the grants was going to be aligned with uptake by students and the completion of the necessary hours to get those grants.
Okay, we're out of time on this round, but Mr. Poilievre, stick with me for a minute, will you?
Yes.
Because I do see some on clarity. It's not a right word, I guess, but I do see some problems here. I thought in your remarks, Ms. Warnick, you indicated you approached we. And Mr. Poilievre, in his statement a minute ago, and I might not have this, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Pierre, he basically said that the proposal originated with we to meet the political, I don't know whether the word was demand of the government or desire of the government. We're miles apart on those two statements. So what we really, is that statement correct, that the proposal originated with we? Or did you, I believe in your remarks, indicated that you made the first initiative to talk to we as one of the organizations? Where are we at here? Let's establish the foundation that we're actually dealing with facts here, if I could. So Ms. Warnick, can you clarify where we're at?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
That's okay. I used to be in the good old days. Go ahead.
So, as I mentioned in my statement, in the context of working very quickly to input into a student announcement that was going to happen in a few days, we were exploring very quickly potential options and thinking about who could could potentially help government in that space. And as I mentioned, in the context of developing the student package and assessing options, my recollection is that We Charity was one of the options that came up in discussions, given their experience as the largest youth serving organization in Canada. I called We Charity on April 19th to seek some input on the program concept. Then, as I mentioned in my statement, I learned the details of what the government wanted for a Canada Student Service grant through the Prime Minister's announcement. Following that announcement, I received by email a proposal from We Charity. This is not the same thing as saying what went to Cabinet. This is saying that a third party hearing about the announcement submitted a proposal.
Okay, that clarifies it for me.
It's not clear though, Chair.
I will give Mr. Poilievre basically. Ms. Warnick approached we on April 19th. On April 22nd, she got an email from Craig Kirby. I'll give you another minute or so because this is important. Mr. Poilievre.
So to be clear, you contacted we on the 19th, and then Mr. Kielburger came back to you with a proposal on the 22nd. Is that the order?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Had he contacted you prior to the 19th?
No, as I mentioned, I contacted him on the 19th.
You contacted him on the 19th to ask him for that. And so he had knowledge that this program was going to be announced by the Prime Minister before the public did.
I contacted him on the broad parameters and scope of what we were talking about, how to engage youth to get involved in service, issues around quick implementation, and my recollection of the conversation on the broad concepts with Mr. Kielburger was that he raised lots of expertise and concerns related to youth and engaging youth, and that not-for-profits were struggling in the COVID context, that it would be very challenging to keep them safe. So it would require virtual placements. And he gave some expertise as one of the largest youth service organizations on the concept.
I am going to move on, but I'll give you time to think about where we're at here too, Pierre, and maybe you'll have to come back in a little later. I'll go to Ms. Sirowitz and then on to Mr. Fortin. Ms. Sirowitz.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I want to say a huge thanks to Ms. Wilson and to Ms. Warnick for your great presentation. I think you were painstaking in terms of explaining to us the challenge that was before you, how little time you had. And I'm just going to interpret sort of what you've just said over the last minute or so, just because I want to make sure I understand it clearly. My understanding from what you've indicated is that there was a student package that was about to be announced on April 22nd. There was going to be a component around volunteer or student service. And so in advance, there was some discussion about who could be some different options. And there was a phone call, sort of like a exploratory phone call that was made to Mr. Kielburger at We Charity. And so it was an exploratory phone call, and then unsolicited, Mr. Kielburger ended up on this 22nd, when the announcement was made, submitting a proposal to the government. Do I have that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I'm just going to add to that. Discussions prior to a public announcement is a regular course of activity. There's nothing strange about it. I've seen it all the time.
Well, and I think that was an important addition. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. And it's important also to understand we're in mid-April. This is 1 month after the lockdown, and we are in a very fast pace doing our very best to provide enormous amount of supports to Canadians. And the group we were focusing on was youth right now. So Ms. Warnick, just to continue with this, so after April 22nd, did you consider, and I think you mentioned this, but I wanted this to be very clear, did you consider other organizations? Did you look internally before you made the recommendation that we was the only one based on all of the parameters, the objectives and the parameters that you have laid out?
Mr. Chair, yes, we did consider other organizations. First, we considered our Canada Service Corps program partners. My team had been in discussions with them to explore the potential expansion of the program, and they had indicated they were struggling to deliver their existing contribution program in the COVID context. It's important to recall that this programming under Canada Service Corps is bringing groups of youth together and involves often traveling. And it was April, it was pandemic.
Right.
Then we assess the ability of other organizations focused on volunteering, such as Volunteer Canada. In our assessment, we were unable to identify a single organization that adequately met the need for broad geographic reach, technological capacity, and experience working with youth, particularly youth from underserved communities.
And I also heard from you very clearly that there was this great desire to ensure that we had a program that was out by mid-May. I think there was that initial hope. So in a very short period of time as well. And I think that's appreciated because I think most university students and youth are on university break, and it provides them with an opportunity and time to be able to volunteer. Can I just ask a quick question? We had provided an unsolicited sort of submission to you, Ms. Warnick. Were there any other groups that sort of provided unsolicited proposals as well once the announcement was made?
No.
Okay. And then the next question I want to just clear up, just because I think we were talking about 19.5 million that was being paid to we, and then we went to 43.5 million. And if you could just maybe clarify for us a little bit, my understanding is that the whole $912 million for the program, it was for, it was sort of up to $912 million, and it was for, it was to anticipate up to $100,000 students. And so I think the original 9.5 million was for the first 20,000 placements. And if there was the next tranche of placements, then it would be the next amount. So it would go up to the 43.5 million. If you could just clarify that, I just want to make sure that that's clear for everyone.
Mr. Chair, that is very clear. I think the funding envelope put against it of 912 million reflects the government's ambition to reach as many students as possible and provide financial rewards to them for rewards to them as many as possible. The vast majority of the funding for this was the grant payments to students and recent grads. As for the funding to support programming supports and delivery and supports to not-for-profits, that was linked to the number of placements. So you've described it correctly. This is a common practice in contribution agreements. Additional payments would not be made until there was proof of uptake and that the desired results were being achieved.
And then I just have one more question, just actually on the contribution agreement, just because I think for the layperson, particularly the way, unfortunately, the opposition presents it. So the contribution agreement, we went to that because, again, it's for the expediency of this. But I don't want to give the public the impression that there was no oversight, there was no performance measurements, there was no accountability for the dollars. If you can, Ms. Warnick, if you can actually just talk to that, because I don't want people to feel that, well, we didn't go to a service agreement. So service agreement would have had to go to an RFP, which would have taken a lot of time. So we understand why that option was off the table. We stayed with the contribution agreement, but I want to give confidence to Canadians that there was oversight, there were performance measurements, and what those elements were in place.
And if you can make that a fairly tight answer, Ms. Warnick.
Mr. Chair, then if I could call on my colleague, Ms. Hébert, to answer as she's got the details of the contribution agreement.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak to the contribution agreement. As was noted, there was a number of checks and balances that were integrated into the contribution agreement. So we did have a clear payment schedule. The payment schedule was very clearly tied to program activities that We Charity was to undertake to support the design and the delivery of the program. As well, the payment schedule also was aligned, so it was very commensurate with the expected uptake of the program. And so therefore, we worked closely with We Charity to, be able to negotiate that and to, determine what payments would be made at what moments. The other point that I would like to make is with the contribution agreement, it is subject to monitoring. It is subject to regular reporting. So We Charity was responsible to provide regular reports to the Government of Canada, like we do in all contribution agreements. Similarly, it was subject to all of the other requirements that contribution agreements that recipients are subject to. So things like audit, evaluation, and different program oversight measures, because it is ultimately a performance-based agreement that we are entering into with recipients. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. Turning then to Mr. Fortin. Floor is yours, sir, followed by Mr. Angus.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame Morneau, bonjour. Dites-moi, avant de communiquer avec Monsieur Kilberger le 19 avril, est-ce que vous le connaissiez déjà?
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur le Président. J'ai déjà travaillé avec l'organisme uni dans le contexte du programme Canada Service Corps, que j'oublie maintenant l'acronyme, le titre en français. Alors, dans ce contexte-là, j'avais déjà travaillé avec lui, puis j'avais connu l'organisme à travers notre travail, à travers notre
Ça va, je comprends. Est-ce que vous avez approché d'autres organismes avant le 22 avril pour savoir s'ils étaient disposés à gérer ce programme-là?
Monsieur le Chair, comme j'avais déjà expliqué plusieurs fois, il faut se retourner en mi-avril dans un contexte de crise de pandémie. On avait quelques jours pour discuter.
Mais juste oui ou non, avez-vous communiqué avec d'autres organismes?
On avait passé à travers plusieurs organismes, comme j'avais dit.
Avez-vous la liste des organismes?
Oui, je peux vous dire tout de suite le nom de
both
plusieurs.
of you, let's allow time for an answer here if we could. Ms. Warnick, did you talk to other organizations, I think was the question.
Alors, j'ai commencé en disant dans mon allocution qu'on avait considéré la Service Jeunesse Canada.
J'entends pas, Monsieur le Président.
Ça inclut, il faut comprendre, Monsieur le Président, que ça comprend 12 organismes. Ça comprend Apathy et Plate, Grand Frère, Grand Sœur, j'ai pas tous les noms en français devant moi, Canada, je vais changer.
Est-ce qu'on peut avoir la liste?
On avait consulté tous les organismes. Est-ce que j'ai le droit de répondre ou est-ce que c'est...
Oui, mais la question était juste, en avez-vous communiqué et avez-vous une liste? Mais je veux pas qu'on la lise parce que là, mon 6 minutes va y passer, Monsieur le Président.
Alors, je peux soumettre par écrit la liste des organismes auxquels on a parlé, monsieur. Désolé pour le retard.
Non, je vous comprends. Je vous remercie, Mme Warnick.
Both Mr. Fortin, Ms. Warnick, if both people are speaking at the same time, the interpreters cannot translate. So we'll go to Mr. Fortin and then we'll come back to Ms. Warnick. Mr. Fortin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Mme Warnick. Mme Warnick, au moment où vous avez fait la recommandation pour l'organisme de M. Kilberger, est-ce que vous saviez à ce moment-là que l'épouse du Premier ministre avait été ambassadrice pour We Charity?
Ms. Warnick.
J'ai fait la recommandation mensuelle qui était faite au gouvernement. Et oui, j'étais au courant du fait que sa femme était ambassadrice pour la santé mentale.
Et est-ce que vous saviez que sa mère et son frère avaient été payés comme conférenciers pour Oui auparavant?
Non.
Vous ne saviez pas. OK. Est-ce que vous avez eu des discussions avec Mme la ministre à ce sujet-là? Est-ce que vous, sur la collaboration entre la famille de M. Trudeau et l'organisme We Charity?
Ms. Warnick?
Yes, sorry, it's changing into English for the interpreters, just changing the language. So the department did not conduct or provide any assessment of potential conflicts of interest by public office holders. The onus is on the public office holders to uphold the guidelines.
Ouais,
Mr. Fortin?
Je sais, la question était seulement, je m'excuse, mais la question était seulement de savoir est-ce que vous avez eu une discussion avec la ministre, Mme Chagger, ou un autre ministre, concernant cette question-là des liens entre la famille Trudeau et l'organisme que vous recommandiez à ce moment-là?
Non, j'ai eu aucune discussion là-dessus.
Okay. Est-ce que j'ai bien compris tantôt que la distinction que vous faites entre un contrat et une entente de collaboration, c'est que dans le cas du contrat, vous devez faire un appel d'offres et dans le cas de l'entente de collaboration, de contribution, vous devez faire un appel de proposition. Est-ce que j'ai bien compris? C'est la distinction qu'il y a entre les deux?
Je pense que ce n'est pas exactement le cas, la façon que vous le décrivez. Encore une fois, je suis un peu trop nerveuse. Malgré que je suis québécois, je vais changer en anglais. So there's a big difference between transfer payment policy and procurement policy. And under the transfer payment policy, we negotiate agreements with partners. And there are various mechanisms for entering into those negotiations. It can be through an open call. It can be through a solicited proposal. It can be through an unsolicited proposal. And I, again, take you back to April and the context of the crisis the government was in. And the determination was made that negotiating a contribution agreement with a partner was the fastest and most appropriate path forward, particularly as this was involving programming for youth, and the government does not do direct delivery.
Est-ce qu'il y a Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas un processus quand même qui doit être mis en place pour appeler des propositions ou des offres de services avant d'attribuer un contrat de contribution?
Ms. Warnick.
There is no specific exigence, or sorry, now I'm talking Franglais. A requirement to hold a open call for proposal. I will ask my colleague that is very expert in this to also provide the committee with additional information.
Ms. Hebert.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Quand on reçoit des propositions, même si c'est par un appel de proposition ou si ça vient directement de l'organisme, on a toujours besoin de vérifier que la proposition rencontre les termes et les conditions du programme et que cette proposition va nous aider à avancer les objectifs du programme. Alors, on a toujours besoin de faire cette analyse.
Et avez-vous fait un appel de proposition? C'était la question.
Sorry, Mr. Fortin, you're out of time.
Non, mais la question était, y a-t-il eu un appel?
You're out of time.
Monsieur le Président, vous ne voulez pas entendre les questions? C'est quoi? J'ai posé une question simple et pendant 5 minutes, on tourne autour du pot. Je m'excuse, Monsieur le Président, mais je voulais savoir, y a-t-il un appel de proposition qui devrait être mis en marche à ce moment-là? Mais là, on m'explique que les propositions sont analysées. J'en conviens, là, je sais, j'en doute pas. La question est, y a-t-il un appel de proposition?
Monsieur le Président, je peux répondre qu'il n'y avait pas d'appel.
Ms. Ward, there was no call for proposals, Ms. Warnick said. Did you finish your answer, Ms. Hebert? Ms. Hebert? Okay. Okay, then turning to Mr. Angus, around 6 minutes. Charlie, we've been running over a fair little bit. Go ahead, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just, are we going to go with the standard we've been doing in the House? I'm going to keep my questions short, if we can get short answers that we weren't talking over each other.
I will try reasonably, but keep in mind, I do not mind committee members kind of browbeating politicians. We're used to it. I don't want to see that happen with public servants. So go ahead and we'll give it a try. Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you, Madame Wernick. So prior to the announcement on April 19th, if I understand you, there was a proposal from we that was circulating. It wasn't the same proposal, but it was a proposal. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And was that, do you know where that proposal was circulated? Did it
As I mentioned previously, I would prefer to provide that to the committee to ensure completeness and accuracy of information by writing.
Certainly, and you would provide the proposal as well?
Yes, this is possible.
Thank you so much. I guess because we're here for two reasons. One is certainly the connections to the Trudeau family that raised a lot of alarm bells, but the sense that because of the close connection with the Kielburgers and the Prime Minister that they got the inside track. So if there was a proposal that influenced the Prime Minister and you doing your due diligence as a civil servant called me and
Charlie, Mr. Angus, Charlie, I don't want to interrupt, but hold up your mic. The translators are having a bit of difficulty and we want to hear the pureness of your voice.
Oh, thank you, Wayne. I'm so sorry. Who's ever said that I wasn't loud enough? You're the first. So the question is whether or not we got the inside track. So if there was a proposal that the Prime Minister loved and then laid out the basic parameters, so when you call 3 days later, Kielburger's already, he's got the ideas, he's set to go. Is it possible that because they had already circulated this, that the Prime Minister set it up and then so you dutifully followed through?
Ms. Wernick?
Mr. Chair, I cannot speculate, but I can tell you that in the context that I was in mid-April, in a crisis situation, I gave some options and assessments to inform the announcement by the Prime Minister on April 22nd, based on my expertise and experience with various organizations. And based on an understanding that there was a desire to launch this initiative within 3 weeks because it was a summer initiative that students needed to start taking advantage of as quickly as possible.
Well, thank you for that. I just wanted to really clarify your position in how this is being played out because Minister Chagger said a number of times that this was your idea, that you came up with it. And I don't want you to be wearing this if this was a political decision. So I wanted to just clarify that. So I thank you for that. So the question was raised again about the Trudeau family links. And I asked Minister Chagger if this was raised. It would have seemed to me something that would have been red flagged because of the close connection between the Trudeau family, the fact that his mother and brother and wife were closely involved. Did you raise the Trudeau family connection as a red flag?
Mr. Chair, I don't have any direct knowledge of that. And as I mentioned, the department does not provide assessment of potential conflicts of interest by public office holders. The onus is on those office holders to uphold the guidelines.
Oh, I understand that. I guess that my question was, when you're making a proposal, you're going to have the plus and minuses, and this, this blew up in the government's face. So I was wondering who raised those red flags. So now just about the financing, because we heard 19.5, then we heard 43 million. I'm not interested in that number. I'm interested in the per student placement, other values that would have been identified. The minister said that it would come out later. What was the agreement, say, for onboarding fees and training that we would do? How much could they get per placement?
So, Mr. President, you've been a president and a minister. Mr. Chair, as I mentioned, and as I think my colleagues have mentioned, contribution agreements lay out the funding, the broad program and policy objectives, the desired results, and then it is for the third party to determine, make decisions about how they achieve those results.
So there were other fees, and this is what I'm concerned about, because about due diligence and performance measures. You said you needed a website that had a lot of bang. We find out when it opened, there were 1,500 bogus placements on there. Did you do due diligence on this, or was this something that came up from we?
So, Mr. Chair, I think is not an insufficient understanding of the digital aspects of this. When we were asked by the government to create the I Want to Help platform, our first reflex was to look at our job bank technology. So ESDC had made significant investments in the job bank infrastructure, and it met security and official language requirements. And that was the first phase of work on the platform. In the course of...
sorry, we'll give you time, Mr. Angus. Finish, Ms. Warnick.
So in the course of negotiating the contribution agreement, there was additional requirements for that came forward with respect to registering students' desire for tracking of hours. There was also issues around validating not-for-profits. Are they registered charities? There was a lot of desire to collect data about the students, and so that we could report. And so there was, as I mentioned in my statement, there was significant technological capacity required to ensure both the program requirements, the eligibility requirements, and that due diligence was being done to vet and ensure students were going to safe, legitimate placements.
Thank you.
We'll have to go back to Mr. Angus. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, and I'm thankful for the answer. I was asking about the 1,500 bogus placements and due diligence there, but my final question would be in response when I asked Madame Chagger about the possible illegalities of paying post-secondary students well below minimum wage to do work that would be considered paid work, that would put charities in issues of legal liability because you cannot transgress
Monsieur le Président, point d'ordre.
Point of order, Charlie, just hold on. Mr. Fortin.
Désolé, M. Angus et M. le Président, mais l'interprète me dit qu'elle n'est pas en mesure d'interpréter ce que M. Angus nous dit. Alors, je ne sais pas, je crois qu'il parle trop loin de son micro. Désolé, mais...
Okay, I think, Mr. Angus, I believe you're not holding your mic up again. The translators were having trouble and they were telling Mr. Fortin that, which is good.
Okay.
Go ahead. Start over.
I'll just finish the question then. Is that this plan that would have post-secondary students working well below minimum wage and calling it volunteering puts charities at risk of legal liability if a student says this was actually paid work. So I asked the minister if she had done due diligence and gotten a legal opinion, and she said that she was confident, quote, the public service would have done their due diligence and would have requested a legal opinion. So Madame Morneau, did you get a legal opinion that this plan paying students so much below minimum wage would meet the legal tests under provincial labor law?
Ms. Warnick?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I need to clarify that this was a lump sum financial award, like a bursary at the end of the summer. It was not an hourly wage, and that was the nature of the grant.
But that's not how you presented it. That's not how you presented it, that if they did 100 hours, they got $1,000. If they did 170 hours, they still only got $1,000. They got paid by how much work they did. That's an hourly wage.
Okay,
that's the legal question.
We'll have to conclude it there. I'll let Ms. Warnick answer, and I don't know, Ms. Hebert had her, I thought she might have wanted in earlier, but go ahead, Ms. Warnick.
Very quickly, rewards are like that. Like air miles, you have to reach certain levels before you get a reward. In terms of the illegal advice provided, I'm not privy. I'm not able to speak to that, as you know, because that would constitute advice to ministers and solicitor-client privilege.
Oh. So it was advice to the minister.
Okay, we're well over on that round as well. So we We have 4 questioners up, and we'll give 5 minutes each to them, or 4.5. Mr. Barrett, Mr. McLeod, Mr. Polyev, and Mr. Fragiskatis. Mr. Barrett.
Ms. Wernick, did anyone suggest you call Mr. Kielburger on April 19th?
Mr. Chair, in the context of the mad rush to consider what could be done for the April 22nd announcement, several different organizations were talked about, and it was in that context that I offered to reach out and speak to We Charity, given that I had
Did you call the head of any other organization around the same time?
I personally
That's a yes or no question. Okay, great. Is it typical that partner organizations are notified that they have been successful in becoming a partner via the Prime Minister's office, as was stated in this case by Mr. Kielburger?
And Ms. Wernick.
I cannot speak to that.
That was a media report, I believe. And Mr. Kielburger clarified that, but surely there must be somebody in ESDC that can clarify that. Ms. Hebert, Ms. Wilson, or Ms. Wernick?
If Mr. Chair, the question is whether or not somebody else talked to somebody else, I'm afraid we cannot speculate or provide opinions on things we don't have direct knowledge on.
Okay, no, Mr. Barrett.
Mr. Chair, that's a non-answer. The question was, is it typical that partner organizations are notified that they have been successful in becoming a partner via the Prime Minister's office and not by the ministry, as was stated in this case by the partner? So is it typical, ma'am, that it would be the Prime Minister's office and not you that would contact them? Is that typical?
So, let me take a shot at that if that's
Ms. Hebert,
okay.
yeah, go ahead.
I'd be happy to help after Deputy Wilson weighs in.
Just one short answer would be great.
Okay, so sometimes it occurs, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's a minister, sometimes it's a staff person, sometimes it's an employee. It varies, and so nothing is particularly typical.
Okay, so in this case, who notified Mr. Kielburger that they were the successful proponents, and on what date did that occur?
Ms. Wernick, or whoever.
The We Charity was informed that the contribution agreement had been approved on June 23rd.
By who?
I do not have a recollection of who directly notified them.
Okay, Mr. Baird.
It's interesting, Mr. Chair. On June the 12th, the We Charity announced that they were recruiting for this program during a webcast. So that timeline is inconsistent. Will you submit to the committee the email that you received from Mr. Kielburger that you referenced in a previous answer?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we are collecting all of the information the committee asked for with the deadline, I believe, of August 8th, but we're moving as quickly as we can to pull it all together and get it to the committee.
Okay.
Okay, and I want to circle back to my last question. So how is it that there is multi-sourced reports and documents it's documented that Mr. Kielburger was recruiting for this program on June the 12th if he was notified, supposedly notified weeks later?
So again, in negotiating and working on a contribution agreement with partners, it is not uncommon that partners begin to reach out to other partners, especially in a third-party model, and to develop the program, to consider what needs to be in the contribution agreement, and in this case, given the very, very tight timeline for launch, to basically advance work as much as possible in order to meet the tight timelines required by the government.
Okay, we'll let it go back to Mr. Barrett. Last question.
To your knowledge, was anyone else in government communicating with we in the days between April 19th to 22nd or about that period?
I have no direct knowledge of that. I can only speak to my own communications.
Okay, thank you all. Mr. McLeod, and then on to Mr. Polyev. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the presenters here. Some very tough questions indeed. I want to start by thanking Gina Wilson for using the word miigwech. We hear a lot of French, we hear a lot of English, but there's not very often we hear Indigenous words. So thank you for that. I wanted to also say I think we're in a very difficult situation. A lot of unknowns. The pandemic has caused a lot of issues to come forward. I've heard a lot from the students in my riding initially, and I was very happy to see some very important measures come forward. The moratorium on Canada student loan repayments, the doubling of the student loans program, the increased student loans program funding, and work placement program. I think we're all well received across the country. Our young people are certainly facing their share of challenges, and we also see a lot of other programs that are helping the young people, especially in my riding. I think a lot of Indigenous communities would say the same with the Indigenous community support and the on-land program. Everybody wants to get involved. They want to play a role, and I was quite happy that these placements were coming forward. And it's really unfortunate and regrettable that these placements it looks like they're going to be on hold for a bit now. I'm hoping that our government's objective remains the same, to continue and to try and connect skills and abilities of young people that are looking to improve their skills and connecting with service opportunities to help in our communities, especially when it comes to healing. I understand there was a lot of uptake on the program. I think the minister mentioned 35,000 applications. But I'd like to ask, my first question is, as we move forward, as the government moves forward with administering the Canada Student Service Grant, what steps are being taken to ensure that Indigenous youth and youth in rural and remote northern communities are able to access this program? That's my first question.
Ms. Warnick, want to take that? Or Ms. Wilson?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I can speak briefly to that. One of the key objectives of Minister Chagger, as she stated, was in her role as Minister of Diversity and Inclusion, was to ensure that a broad diversity of students would be involved. As part of the program design, we were seeking active outreach into Indigenous communities, including funding for digital supports and technological supports to ensure connectivity. Because as I mentioned, we're talking about COVID crisis and virtual placements for the most part.
So I always struggle when it comes to decision making and forming an opinion on a lot of things, because the North never seems to get included in some of the tracking mechanisms that the government has and other agencies have. I'm wondering what other demographic information on the CSSG applicants will the government be tracking?
Mr. Chair, we have had a very robust registration form that was provided to students as they entered the program. Obviously, all of the demographic information is voluntary, but we based it closely on working with our Statistics Canada colleagues to capture the maximum amount of information related to background, population, et cetera, et cetera. And We Charity was, as part of the contribution agreement, to provide real-time reports, both on the not-for-profits, where they were, the placements were, what they were of, as well as the students who had registered, and as much demographic and other information about students who had been applying on a bi-weekly basis.
But
Last
we're not
question, Mr. McLeod.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we're not talking about We Charity anymore. I'm talking about going forward as the government moves forward with administrating with this. I want to make sure, first of all, that the Indigenous youth have opportunity that we expected with the We Charity. Are we going to continue with that? And are we going to track some of this?
So, Mr. Chair, it's the government's decisions that will determine that. But we always provide what we call diversity analysis in the work that we put forward.
Okay, thank you all. We'll end that there. Mr. Poilievre, are you there? I just seen your mic switch on. Go ahead.
Yes, Ms. Wernick, who told you to call Mr. Kielburger on April 19th?
Mr. Chair, as I have mentioned, there were conversations with finance officials, and in that context of those discussions about potential organizations.
Who asked you to call him on the that led to your call of April 19th?
In those conversations, We Charity came up, and I volunteered to call them because of my prior work with them.
Who brought them up?
And because they were an obvious choice as the largest youth-serving organization.
Sorry, I just asked a very specific question. Who brought them up? You said they came up. Who brought them up?
Ms. Wernick.
So we were having conversations with Department of Finance, and different organizations were mentioned in that context. I said, well, I know We Charity. I can reach out to them.
So were you the first person that brought up We Charity, or did someone else bring it up before you in the conversation?
To the best of my recollection, it was raised by the Department of Finance officials.
Department of Finance officials. Do you have a name?
The lead official that I was working with was Michelle Kovacevic at the Department of Finance.
And that was the person who brought up We Charity. Sorry, it's just taking a phenomenal amount of time to answer a very simple question.
Well, yeah, but we want proper, accurate information on the record, and not speculation. And
she was there, Chair.
I know she was there, and I know it was a group discussion, is basically what she said. Ms. Wernick, you want to answer?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chair. It was a group discussion, and to the best of my recollection, it was in those group discussions that the name came.
So that wasn't the question. And so we've given the name of a finance official. We'll have to assume, unless you later correct the record, that this official was the one that brought up the name of We. And so now
Pierre, I'm going to correct the record, Pierre. She said that individual was the lead for finance. So let's not speculate too far. Floor is yours.
I'll ask one last time, and then if not, we'll have to consider whether we pursue this further and more formally. Was this official the one who asked you to contact We?
Ms. Wernick.
Yes or no? If not, I'll move on. Yes or no?
I have to come back to, it was April context. It was we were working 12-hour days.
Right, that was.
And I remember several conversations, and I am not comfortable.
You said that the minister. You said
specifying the direction. My recollection.
Mr.
I'm not being allowed to answer, Mr. Chair.
Poilievre.
You're not allowing yourself to answer.
Mr. Poilievre.
No, I am trying to take you back to mid-April.
This is not a court. I'm gonna. If we go over time on this panel, we will. And I don't want to see the witnesses browbeat. Ms. Wernick is doing her best. To give her time to answer. Ms. Wernick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it is important, the context. 12-hour days, lots of different conversations. Everybody's working at home, mostly on conference calls. And I do know that the official I mentioned was the lead on the student package at the Department of Finance, but my recollection is that I volunteered in the context of going through many organizations, some of which I have mentioned, Canada Service Corps partners.
This is an extremely long answer
again,
for a
Mr.
very direct
Chair,
question.
I'm not allowed to finish my answer.
Right, because you're not answering the question.
I am.
You're very
I'm
evasive.
answering.
You're very evasive.
We'll let you, Mr. Poilievre, next question. Go ahead.
All right. So we know we're onto some trouble there. Moving on to the next question. When you you said that the We Charity had circulated a proposal, and that proposal had gone to ministers, and this was in mid-April. How did you know that?
I knew it. My recollection is I would know it for two different reasons. One, because Mr. Kielburger told me that it had been shared, particularly with Minister Ng, is my recollection. But I also recall approving a briefing note for Minister Chagger to meet with We Charity that spoke of the proposal. And I do recall some emails from other government officials at PCO and ISED also referring to this proposal. So I would prefer, if I could finish, I would prefer to provide...
Mr. Poilievre, let her finish your answer and then we'll go to the last question. Go ahead.
As I had said earlier, I would prefer to provide the committee with more accurate and complete information about that as best I can contribute to in terms of that proposal and who had it.
We look forward to that information. Mr. Poilievre, last question.
You claim that the contribution agreement was only approved on June 23rd, and yet there is evidence that the We Charity was advertising to its internally to of its plan to administer this program on June the 12th, 11 days earlier. How is it possible that the We Charity knew 11 days before the contribution agreement was approved that it would be administering this program unless it was communicated to them by a back channel?
We entered into a negotiation of a contribution agreement with We Charity in mid-May. And it takes, as anybody familiar, it takes many weeks to negotiate a contribution agreement. Any activities that We Charity took on during the period leading up to this finalization and approval of the contribution agreement were completely at their own risk.
Okay, then we will have to end that series there. And last questioner, we'll go a little over in this panel. Mr. Fragiskatis, you got 5 minutes. Peter, your mic's on.
It was on, it was off, it's back. Hope you can hear me. Sorry about that. I want to ask more about third parties and just, in general terms, because obviously this was a third party that was looked at. How common is it for governments to rely on third parties? I know that in the context of COVID-19, that the federal government has partnered, for example, with United Way, with Food Banks Canada. We was suggested, obviously that's not going ahead, but how common is it for third parties to carry out work that the government has prioritized, and what are some of the reasons that that lead in that direction?
Yes, Mr. Chair, it is the primary vehicle used in grants and contributions programming is to work with third parties. We have 13 third parties delivering service programming for us under the Canada Service Corps. So we are funding organizations to do direct delivery of programming on the ground. The government generally does direct deliver benefits and payments, as we've talked about with the CERB and pensions and things like that. But when it comes to delivery of programming in communities across the country, we're very much dependent on third-party organizations to deliver that programming. and provide those supports on the ground.
I don't know. I believe Ms. Hebert, did you want in there? If you do, raise your hand.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So to just further build on the response that has been provided by my colleague, yes, we do work very closely with third parties in the context of contribution agreements. And so I just would like to sort of put on the table some of the factors that we would consider. So, you know, as my colleague has mentioned, the time frame in which we need to work, the volume of desired recipients who we ultimately need to reach. We would want to be able to, you know, leverage their networks, leverage their experience, you know, leverage their knowledge in this space. So my colleague has mentioned partnerships that we have, the work that we do with organizations in the context of the Canada Service Corps. We have also done this in the context of the Emergency Community Support Community Emergency Support Program, where we're working closely with the Red Cross, the Community Foundations Canada, as well as with United Way Canada. Again, to support funding to seniors in their communities, we also established a contribution agreement with the United Way Centrale Canada. And this was to enable us to be able to, you know, disperse funds, really reach Canadians in their communities, and where we were really able to leverage the expertise and the networks of the third-party organizations to ultimately help us achieve the policy and program objectives that had been set out in these different programs and these different, you know, initiatives that we were funding.
Like others, Peter, I'll give you some of that time back. Go ahead.
That's appreciated, Mr. Chair. To Ms. Wernick or to Madame Hebert, whoever wishes to take it. Is it fair to say that in the context of COVID-19, with a public service that was squarely focused on helping as many Canadians as possible, millions of Canadians, and had devoted itself in that way, you know, reorganized itself, particularly around things like the CERB and other programs? Is it fair to say that the public service found itself, if not in an overwhelmed position, certainly in a challenged position, and that context helps us to understand, in particular, the need to reach out to third parties? If in the best of times, third parties are looked to, then certainly one would think that during COVID-19, third parties would certainly be looked to. Is that a fair statement? I think it's on mute. I think Ms. Wernick is on mute.
Apologies, Mr. Chair. Yes, that is a fair statement. Okay. As we said, depending on the requirements, the speed of implementation, third party is used. And in the COVID context, as I think we've all mentioned, the department and the Service Canada's capacity was stretched to the absolute maximum.
Last question, Mr. Chair. Are calls for proposals issued for every contribution agreement?
So, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take that question. So we don't issue call for proposals for every single agreement. The vast majority of agreements that we do manage, if they're annual calls and we're dealing with a high volume, like Canada Summer Jobs, in that particular instance, we do a call for proposal. But members will also recall that in this context of Canada Summer Jobs this year, we also solicited proposals. We also invited members of Parliament to bring forward proposals to our attention so that we could work with organizations who were delivering emergency community supports and critical services within their communities. So I think that's an excellent example of where you have a call for proposal, but where concurrently we also invited and we solicited proposals from employers to assist us. The last point that I would make, Mr. Chair, is the point that I had made earlier, and that at the end of the day, we have to assess all proposals. The proposals must be eligible, and the proposals must meet the terms and conditions of the program. And the proposals that we fund, ultimately, and the agreements that we enter into have to advance our program objectives. Thank you.
Okay, we will thank you to you all. We will have to end it there. We're a little beyond our end time. I believe there was a number of questions that we would be expecting some answers back in writing for clarity. I think when you look at the if people are monitoring from the department, there's some answers we do need for clarity. I know everything will be provided in the call for documents by August 8th, but if there's some things you can provide related to today's discussion, that would be helpful.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. May.
Can I say something for 10 seconds?
We'll give you 12.
Okay, I just want to thank the officials because I remember what it was like in April. Workload was crushing. You were working 7 days a week. I really appreciate your work.
That's a very good point to make, Elizabeth. And I was going to say in conclusion, I know as public servants during the COVID-19 pandemic, you've been working extremely long hours, 7 days a week, under a lot of pressure, and we understand that. And you did the public service from all departments has done tremendous work for Canadians and for the country, and we understand that. I also understand that we've probably added to some of that pressure on you today, and that's as a result of some decisions that got made somewhere, and it's our right as parliamentarians to look further in it, and we will be doing that. But I do know everyone appreciates the work that you've done for this country, and we certainly appreciate you appearing today and are answering our questions on this committee. I know it's not easy, but we appreciate you appearing today. So with that, we'll wish you to at least find a little time for a break this weekend if you can. So with that, we will suspend for 2 minutes and go to the next panel. Meeting suspended. Thank you all.